everybody. Welcome back to Findmypast From Home. My name is Ellie. I'm Senior Community Executive at Findmypast, and welcome. We're going to do a nice, relaxed midweek session today on the everyday people who dress the royals. Now, whether you're into coronations and royalty and monarchy or not, we're gonna have a chat. It's an important historic moment that's happening this weekend. And I'm not going to be alone as we chat about this today. I'm really delighted to welcome back returning guest, Dr. Kate Strasdin. Hi, Kate.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm fine. It's lovely to be chatting to you again. Thanks for inviting me back. I always enjoy everybody's company here. So yes, lovely.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you. Are, of course, in the midst of book promotion right now.
Yeah. It's been brilliant. No, I'm it's been a whirlwind, but in all the right ways. So yeah.
Excellent. Just for anybody who hasn't seen you on Findmypast From Home before, would you mind just briefly introducing yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Kate Strasdin, and I teach down at Falmouth University. I teach cultural studies to textile and fashion students, and so I'm a dress historian, specialising in sort of 19th century and early 20th century women's wear specifically, but I do have a past in royal dress because that was the subject of my PhD. So I was looking at the surviving garments of Queen Alexandra, who was Queen Victoria's daughter-in-law, and the people that kind of contributed to her wardrobe. So it's sort of returning to my roots, really.
Excellent. We've got lots of people joining us here today. Victoria says, welcome back, Kate. Just love it when you are on.
Oh, thanks, Victoria.
We've got Andrea joining us from a windy Stoke-on-Trent. We've got Daphne joining us from a sunny Somerset. Yes, the sun is trying to come out in Edinburgh. I don't think it's going to stay there. No, I think as well, I've got washing on the line and it's quite windy, and I keep looking out the window to see if it's blown away. It could happen. So yeah, in terms of what we're going to be chatting about today, everybody, we are going to briefly discuss the upcoming coronation on Saturday. I think it is Saturday, isn't it? Mm. Then Kate and I are going to chat about clothing and the significance of clothing in events like coronations and throughout history. Then what we'll do is we'll sort of we'll segue a little bit away from that, and we'll start to focus on the everyday people behind the royals, so royal household, and how you might be able to find out if your ancestor or a relative happened to work for the royals to keep everything running smoothly. The people who dress them, for example, we'll particularly be focusing on. Then we'll have a look at what people wore at coronation events, for example. We've got some pictures to show you. And then if we've got time, I've got a little bit of research that I can share into people who lived in Windsor Castle and worked for the royals in 1921. I can share a little bit about that as well. So that's the plan. If you have any questions for Kate, please feel free to pop them into the comments, and we will either do them all at the end, or we'll if they're relevant to what we're chatting about, we'll do them as we go, I think. How does that sound, Kate?
Sounds great. Can't wait. It'd be lovely.
Excellent. So yeah, big historical events coming up on Saturday. I keep trying to repeat. Is it Saturday? Yes, it is Saturday. It's not something that I have ever witnessed in my lifetime before. I'm sure many of us don't remember the previous coronation in 1953. I know my grandmother does. But yeah, I think what's quite nice about it is that it's a moment for us all to come together and celebrate, I think. What do you think, Kate?
Yeah, I agree. I think regardless of as you say, how people might feel about the monarchy, I think there's a very interesting, that thread of pageantry and tradition that stretches back centuries is fascinating just from a historical point of view. So how all of those things come together during that whole day and during the ceremony itself, and the importance that outward appearances plays in that, and the sort of various symbolic moments, and the garments that go with it. It is fascinating, and of course, it isn't just the monarchy themselves. It is the people that contribute to how that happens. So it is all of those unseen hands that make that possible. And I think that's where it becomes endlessly fascinating, because that is about ordinary people.
Exactly. And we were talking a little bit earlier before we went live about the people who have been making the embroidering the new ciphers, for example, on the uniforms. Like, that's taken several years, actually, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. So I was, when I was doing some research into embroidery for Queen Alexandra, I went to Hand and Lock in London, which is a ceremonial embroiderer, and they work for couture houses as well, but they've been around for a very long time, and they were telling me that they had been working on some of the ciphers and gold work for the new cipher, and this was a number of years ago. And that's because there has to be that smooth transition. So figures like the beefeaters and those kinds of uniforms move from the ER of Elizabeth to CR for Charles. It has to be quite seamless. And so those kinds of things have been happening for a long time. So it's that kind of behind the scenes activity that has been in the planning for much longer than just the coronation itself.
Absolutely. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes. This is a huge event. It's not just about crowning a king. It's about all of these people coming together to put on this incredible event that will stand the test of time. There's not, we've already discussed the people who will amend the ciphers, for example. That's just one example, and that's a huge operation. There's also the people the emergency services, for example. There's preparing the Abbey. I can't remember who I was talking to. Somebody was talking to me about the rehearsals that are going on throughout the night in London, to put on this incredible event. And it's a huge team effort, which I quite like. It's a big team effort at the end of the day.
Yes, exactly. It's more than one man. It is about all of those industries and all of those employments and things that have contributed that throughout the history of the monarchy. There are always the ordinary people that often are perhaps unnamed, or certainly don't make the headlines, but they have contributed, and it's been a big part of their life as the employees for either the royal household or any number of those kind of subsidiary industries that support that whole thing.
Absolutely. An open question to anybody watching. Will you be marking the occasion on Saturday? And if so, how will you be celebrating? And also, do you or your relatives remember the last coronation? How did they mark the occasion? And I put those questions to you as well, Kate.
Yeah, my mum's, I think my mum's parents, so my grandparents, my mum grew up in London, and they bought a television, which I think was very, that was quite a thing, wasn't it, that year? Television sales really spiked in 1953, and they watched it on a television, a little one that they'd never had before. So that was a sort of exciting moment, as well as the coronation itself, was this whole new gadget in their lounge.
Yeah, it's quite mind-boggling to think how much has changed in 70 years. It's a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's where the view of things, because we'll be seeing everything in high definition, and thinking about all the social media channels, and the way that we've already seen detailed looks by the Royal School of Needlework at things like how they're embroidering the robes, and details about the canopy that goes above the king when he's being anointed. So all these things, those are the kind of details that you get in kind of glorious Technicolor now, as well as the actual ceremony itself. So yeah, that opportunity to see it in such great, immense detail is greatly changed.
Yeah, it's just bizarre to think. It's It's the same, but it's not the same. There are certain elements of the coronation that will stay the same. But from what I've read, they're going to try and make it a slightly more updated version. It's going to be more inclusive. But yeah, very, very exciting times.
Yeah, interesting.
So moving over to clothing and the coronation, then how important is clothing to this event, this occasion that happens whenever we have a new monarch? How important is that?
Well, for the monarch themselves, it's really significant because each stage of the ceremony is marked by a different garment. So, for example, when the king and queen come into the abbey, they wear what's called the robes of state. So that's the embroidered velvet robe that they wear to progress down to enter the abbey. Then that gets removed, and for the anointing, so the king will wear, the queen obviously wore that amazingly embroidered dress covered in all the different flowers of the Commonwealth. When it's a male monarch, for a king, it's more likely that it's kind of red tunic, a kind of military style uniform. But that is taken off, and the idea is that it's removing all signs of status. And traditionally in the coronation ceremony, they then put on something called a colobium sindonis, which is a white linen tunic. And this is this idea that it's simple. That's when you're anointed. You know, the idea that you're being anointed before God, that you're sort of divested of all of those trappings of status, and that you just wear this simple robe. And that's never been something that's been filmed before. Whether or not that part of it will be filmed, I don't know if that's the case. But after that, then when that kind of anointing has happened, then the monarch is given the super tunica, which is this gold. Anyone that remembers that picture of the queen sitting on the throne with that very sort of ornate gold garment, that's called the super tunica, and that's the moment that they're handed the scepter and the orb and all of those sort of ceremonial pieces. And then to leave the abbey, they wear the robes of estate, which are different robes, so different velvet robes. So every stage of the process is marked by a different kind of symbolic, significant garment. And so they're really important in terms of the marking each moment, if you like.
So there's several costume changes. That's what you're
trying to say. Costume changes, much practicing, lots of kind of, I'm sure, really nervy, making sure, because of course now it will all be caught on camera, so that the kind of smoothness of those changes as well are going to be key.
Yes, I've been reading about a few previous coronations where, you know, small things will go wrong, and I can't remember who said this. It might have been Victoria's coronation, and somebody afterwards said, we really ought to rehearse this.
Yes, it was. Queen Victoria's coronation was a shambles by all accounts. So there were various diarists at the time that said, oh man, that was really, basically that didn't go very well, did it? I think with Victoria it was very much because she was aware that King George IV's coronation had been this enormously elaborate affair. He'd had thousands of costumes made, especially for it was meant to be like this kind of historical reenactment of all sorts of things. And so it was like he had medieval pages and had spent a fantastic amount. And, you know, we're living in a cost of living crisis now, and that became the way that people perceived that coronation. Because of how fabulously extravagant it was very unpopular. And so when Queen Victoria came to the throne, she was mindful of that not being the case. So she had stripped it right back to its bare essentials, but in doing so they had not really kind of followed through on the details, and it was a little bit chaotic.
Yes, rehearsals are a good thing. Going back to the various garments that the monarch wears throughout this ceremony, then is that something that's is that something that's happened through history? I
Mm.
imagine it's evolved, but
Yeah.
like if we went back to Victoria's coronation, for example, would she
Yes.
have done the same thing?
Yes, exactly. And those garments still survive. So that's the other thread of connection in that way in terms of surviving objects, is that those garments, there's a brilliant book for anyone that's interested in this, particularly in Victoria's robes. It's called In Royal Fashion, and it charts Queen Victoria's life through the clothing that survives. It was an exhibition at the Museum of London in the 90s, and it's a great book, and that includes the garments that she wore. So those kinds of things are preserved as a sign of continuity, and it is all about continuity, because back in the day when coronations had to be organised quite hastily because your claim to the throne might not be quite so robust as you would like, you had to have these symbolic things in order to retain your control of the crown. And so there wasn't the kind of planning, but there were the kind of symbols of state. So the robes, the crown, the sort of trappings of it were the things that kind of cemented your authority.
Yes. And as a medieval historian myself, I completely appreciate that you need to sort of use use these elements of continuity to really
Yes.
establish
Fast.
your position. Yes, yes, it's all part of a wider narrative, isn't it? I just wanted to pull these up. So going back to the ciphers, actually, these were some images we have in our newspaper collection from 1953 of the Royal School of Needlework embroidering the coronation robe on the left-hand side, and then also the cipher being embroidered onto a uniform as well. And I was telling Kate before we went live that I followed the Royal Historic Palace's social media account. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and they revealed the new cipher on the uniforms the other day. And I thought back to these, and I thought, I'll have to show everybody.
Yeah, they're amazing. They're amazing, and those are the people whose entire livelihoods were all about these details that are noticed, but it's not like this is what I always find interesting with textile artists and makers. Other kind of artists, you've got your name signed at the bottom on the canvas. Embroiderers and tailors and dressmakers don't have that kind of luxury, really. So it's special to see those pictures.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're sort of a big name designer and you have a label. But yes, yeah, exactly. I completely agree. Like, how would you know that these people, these women, were doing these incredible pieces of artistry had we not had these photographs?
Yeah,
yeah.
And often they were sworn to secrecy. So for many of these things, particularly if they worked for sort of Hartnell or Royal School of Needlework, the press in the 50s were really interested in this, and they would try and follow the women home and get them to spill the beans on what the dress was going to look like, and so they were sworn to secrecy and they weren't allowed to talk about what they were actually embroidering. So yeah, it was a big responsibility.
If anybody wants to go and have a look at this particular issue, hopefully Rose can grab a link to it. It's The Sphere, the 30th of May, 1953. There's so many more pictures than just these two.
I'm
really, really beautiful. Well. It's yeah, I just chose these two, but yes, there's lots there. I'm just trying to think if there's any other images that I've pulled that are relevant to what we're discussing at the moment. Let me just flick through these and have a look. Oh, we might as well show these off anyway. But these are some images of the. There's a technical term for this, isn't there, Kate?
It's the various coronation robes of the peerage. Yes. So they are, if you're at a certain place in the aristocracy, those families have their coronation robes, their peerage robes that they have in the family and that have been in the family for generations. The robe maker in London, Eden Ravenscroft, they're the ones that for really more than 150 years have been the maker that have made and maintained many of these robes, including the royal robes. So they are one of those establishments that have been going for a long time and probably made a lot of these robes.
Interesting segue. There's one of those. They have a store here in Edinburgh, and that is where my husband bought his wedding suit from.
Oh, did he? Oh, interesting. And now Eden Ravenscroft often also do a lot of graduation robes. So you'll find that when students graduate from university in the UK, it's likely that they will have been hired from Eden Ravenscroft. So yeah, they have this history of kind of ceremonial tailoring, but also these kind of ceremonial robes.
Yeah, it just goes back to that tradition element and the continuity and the continuation of. I'm just trying to think. Are there any other? Just go through to these. So this was another interesting issue. So 25th of June 1902 in the Sketch featured all of these portraits of women, mostly women, I think, and it was all titled America and the Coronation. And I wasn't sure if these were Americans, but I just thought the dresses were really lovely.
Yes, that real Edwardian frou-frou, as it was often called, the kind of chiffon and yeah, I wonder if that was so. I don't know actually if perhaps in the States they were having coronation balls or things like that to mark the event there, and it was an opportunity to put on these really elaborate kind of formal gowns.
Yes. And then I don't know whether this was true or not. I found this in the Tatler in 1953, but apparently for Queen Elizabeth II's coronation, the Earl Marshal, who he organises all the coronations, no matter who the Earl Marshal is, he declared, or his office declared, that any women attending the coronation ceremony had to wear a headdress, as shown by the model here, and the headdress could not be black. It had to be in a lightweight fabric, and it should be on the head, gently covering the hair, but not covering the face. And I'd never heard of this before.
No, nor me, and that's really interesting. I mean, I suppose in the early 50s, you're still at this point where wearing a hat was still considered to be a respectable thing to do pretty much every day anyway. So it's still in that period. But yeah, those kinds of etiquette, those rules that seem, I mean, they're quite picky, aren't they? In many ways, but they are something that informs an awful lot of kind of royal sartorial occasions and how people are expected to appear. And I find it really interesting, all of those changing different notes about what you can and can't do.
Yeah, it's just trying to think if there's any more I've got here. So the one on the left here are court dressmakers working on items for the Queen's coronation wardrobe, apparently, and also for the Duchess of Gloucester and the Queen's train bearers.
Interesting. So that's George VI's
yes,
coronation, and then there are George V and Queen Mary. So many of these, the coronation dresses, it will be interesting to see what Camilla's going to wear, because the coronation dresses are one of those things that get preserved. So Queen Victoria's coronation dress survives. Queen Alexandra's, which is the one I researched a lot on, her gold dress that she had made, the underdress was made in Paris, and then the overdress was embroidered in India. And so that survives in the Royal Ceremonial Dress Collection. Queen Mary's dress survives, and then those subsequent. So yeah, Camilla's dress will enter that kind of space of ceremonial, of coronation dresses, and they're different to the robes. So yeah, the dress is not the coronation robe, which is the velvet bit.
I think that's all the images I have. Oh no, I've got a few more. This was from apparently a coronation ball in 1953, and I just love 1950s fashion. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, what a great! There must have been some absolutely brilliant ensembles at all of those events.
All the ladies have got their hair up,
Yeah.
and I don't think I could cope with that. I don't look very nice with my hair up. Although I did have my hair up on my wedding day. I just wanted it out of the way. But yeah, sort of all of these lovely off-the-shoulder dresses, or a lot of them are sleeveless, and I was born in the wrong era for fashion,
Yes,
that
they're
is.
beautiful.
Good question from Victoria, actually. Will the coronation robes be displayed somewhere afterwards for the public to see?
I'm sure they will. Certainly, that's what they've done in the past with other things after the royal weddings, and so yes. And in the past, traditionally, that has happened. Queen Mary was kind of instrumental in developing the dress collection with the Museum of London, and she recognised that actually preserving royal dress was quite important, kind of historically and culturally. So she became very involved with that. And so some of the early exhibitions of the coronation robes and garments were at her kind of request. And so, yeah, I suspect they will be. You can see Queen Victoria's things are on display as part of the Kensington Palace sort of fixed exhibition that they have there. And interestingly, that at the moment it's just opened, but in Kensington Palace is an exhibition called Crowned Couture, and I think that might be it's not coronation related, but it is kind of royal dress. It's a large exhibition, so yeah, I think that will be an interesting show as well.
I'm going to have to go to that. Sounds really
I'm
good.
going
Sounds right
next
up my
month.
street. Victoria did have another question. Let me find it. What are the best items or products to conserve fabrics from moths, etc.?
Oh, yes, moths, really difficult. The main thing to do is to try and if it's a certain kind of object that you want to preserve rather than it being hanging up in your wardrobe, then having it stored in either acid-free tissue, or if you can get something like a Tyvek bag. Tyvek is a kind of conservation material, and that stops various sort of outside agents affecting the garment. With moth, it's just a case of regular checking. I mean, they are very difficult to eradicate once you've got them. But yeah, if there is a particular thing in something like one of these Tyvek bags, then that can be a good way to protect them.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let's move away from the royal family and the coronation for a moment then. Let's talk a little bit more about the people who worked for the royals, who kept everything looking spick and span, helped everything run smoothly. If you think you might have an ancestor or a relative who worked for the royal family, how might you uncover more of their story?
Well, so I've used, so the Findmypast access to the Royal Household Records is absolutely brilliant, because they are, well, just so rich in detail. I've used the Royal Archive quite a lot, and that's an interesting place to go to. It's in anyone that's been to Windsor Castle, the Royal Archive is in the Round Tower, the Norman Tower on the hill, and that's where they keep the archive, which is the entire archive of the monarchy. And so I've used things like all of the various royal household accounts to look at things like dresses, so wardrobe accounts, all of those kinds of things. That details people's details. You can find a lot of details in the National Archive, which is entirely free to visit, and also has a lot of stuff online. They have things like the Office of Robes accounts, and they often include names of people that. So if you know, for example, that you had a relative that worked for the royal household, you can find a lot of names in the Office of Robes accounts, and they're called the extraordinary accounts books, and they are big, huge volumes about that thick, that come out, and they're basically all the receipts that they ever spent on anything. And so you see a lot of names in those accounts as well. and then, you know, census records. If you find, I've managed to find quite a few people that have worked as either dressers or hat makers, tailors, all of those kinds of things, and searched for them in the census. And I've been quite lucky in the things that I've managed to find. So yeah, there's all sorts of different archival databases and things that will help yield results.
Yeah, there's. I think it's fascinating. I don't think I have any ancestors who work for royals myself.
No, nor me.
I don't think I have any ancestors from further south than Gloucester, so that's probably why.
Yeah.
But yeah, the royal household records are quite incredible. And what I've found when I've looked at them is similar with the crime records. So a few weeks ago, I was chatting with the community about the crime records, and you might see several records for the same person around the same year. And if you're looking at that, if you're seeing that, don't just go in and view one of them, because all of these are from different books and different series, and they'll all tell you slightly different information. Some of them will be filled out. I think, is it the Lord Chamberlain's books? I think that's all actually all filled out in the handwriting of your ancestor, of your relative. So yeah, they filled out these little cards and then they had to sign them at the end. Some of them give more detail than others. I've got an example I can show you afterwards. But yeah, they're really good. And so if you see several records for one person, don't just look at one. Look at all of them. Look at all of them.
Sounds brilliant.
Because as we have said countless times on Findmypast From Home, everything is a clue. You've got to treat everything like it's an extra piece of a puzzle.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong, you're just starting out on pursuing a new publication, and this is what this is going to be focused on, am I right?
It is. So it's very timely for me. The idea is, again, I don't know if anyone ever read Longbourn, which is a novel by Jo Baker that was all about telling the story of Pride and Prejudice from the perspective of Sarah, one of the servants. Yeah. And so what I'm doing is, it's not a novel, but it's non-fiction again, but sort of readable non-fiction, I hope, where it's looking at how, you know, there have been lots of books written about royal fashion and the way particularly royal women appear in public, but less about the people that made that happen. So yes, my book is going to be about those people who were the dressers and the tailors and the dressmakers and the glovers and the lace makers, embroiderers, all of those people, those kind of unseen, often women that we don't know about. So the royal women are like the kind of swan above the water that we don't really see, and we're looking at all the busy industriousness underneath.
And is there anything that you can tease that you've found yet? I won't ask you to give away anything that's top secret.
No, there's really, well, it actually starts, what started me on this was because it is often people don't tell their stories. And so back in 2017, I was doing a tour of Australia, lecture tour. And I was in it was a place called Tewantin, which was on the coast, Queensland coast, and in an Anglican church. So it was all a bit surreal, really. And after my lecture, an elderly lady came up to me and said she wanted to tell me about something she'd done when she was a young lady. And she was there with her two daughters, grown-up daughters. And she said, I was traveling in London on a Contiki ticket, which was a kind of Australian travel ticket in the 1950s. And she said, I got work at Norman Hartnell's, and it turned out I was the same proportion as the Queen, as it was late 1952 and 1953. And so she said, I became the fit model for the coronation dress. And I stood there. She said, I used to stand there in my knickers, and Norman Hartnell would fit various bits of the Queen's coronation dress to her. And then she would go and watch the embroiderers, and she described they all wore a uniform. They wore a kind of grey dress with little white gloves, and she used to watch them embroider the Queen's dress. And her daughters, both of their mouths just fell open, because she'd never told them that this had been a kind of part of her life. And so that's the stories. There's other embroiderers that I've discovered, dressers. There's some great stories about dressers who have had an argument. There was one falling out with Queen Victoria where she was accused of behaving badly and then was sort of sent off, and then there are these letters back and forth. It's like reading emails
I know
of
this
her
story.
saying yes, and then she goes off to America and marries somebody there, but claims a pension for some time in order for it not to all blow up. So there's great tales of again ordinary lives, but in the shadow of this kind of massive institution.
The things they must have seen and the
Mm.
amount they must have had to hush
Mm.
up.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's. I'm pleased this lady told you her story, but at the same time, just the fact that her daughters didn't know.
I know. I couldn't believe that she'd at some point she decided that perhaps it wasn't really very worth telling or particularly interesting. And I just wish I'd got her name. I was on a bit of a whirlwind at the time and didn't get her name. And so it just remains a story that I know that I was told, but I don't know who she was, or I would love to have found that out. But yes, an incredible story.
We'll have to put something out on social media saying, "Do you know this
Yes, do you
lady?"
know
And
who
we'll see
this
if we can
is?
track her down again.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. Did
Mm.
she live in Australia then?
Yeah, so she was living in I think she had traveled in Europe for a little while as a youngster, and then gone back to Australia and lived there in Queensland. Just yes, it was in Tewantin, which was near Noosa, this very beautiful kind of part of the coast. And yeah, just a very small community, and there was this unexpected story.
I just love that. How amazing it would be if we tracked
Mm.
her down. I would
Yeah, I know,
absolutely
but
love
I'm
that.
putting the call out here. That would be brilliant.
So if anybody knows her, please let me or
Yes.
Kate
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
um, yes. So that's a really exciting research project. Actually, you'll have to
Mm,
keep us up to date because it's like with your book. It's the Dress Diary of Van Sykes. It's these everyday people who
mm.
are incredibly skilled and have largely gone under the radar, and it's quite sad.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we tell these stories and that we keep them alive a little bit
Yes, exactly. So
because
I'm at the stage of my research at the moment where I've got a kind of list of suppliers, and what I'm doing is I'm working as if you're kind of undressing the royal body. So it's going to start with the coronation, and then each chapter will be like ceremonial, outdoor, and then gradually sort of retreat backwards so that you get to each kind of item in the wardrobe, and then uh, meet various characters from Queen Victoria through to more recent makers, and all of the different makers who have done the shoes or the hats or the for various royal figures over that kind of couple of centuries.
this is a huge team of people
Mm. Yes. I mean, if you think
if you
about the
think
number
about
of people that have got royal warrants, and the warrant holders are interesting because as soon as the monarch dies, so when the Queen died last September, all of those royal warrants cease to exist. So if you are a royal warrant holder, and that's a big part of your business, that you can have the royal crest above your logo and indicate that you are an official kind of royal warrant holder, but that ceases on the death of the monarch and you have to reapply. And I found some brilliant letters in the Royal Archive where there were obviously some very panicky suppliers. There was one called, I think it was Egerton Burnett, who had made shirts for Queen Victoria, or sort of like undershirts, and really panicky letter to the mistress of the robes saying, "Oh, I hope we can continue to have our royal warrant." And she sends this quite terse letter back saying, "You just have to wait and see. You'll have to apply like everyone else and see whether the new queen wants to keep you." So that in itself is quite a nervy moment, I think, for many of those makers.
yeah, I must admit I'd not thought of that. And I wonder if there's examples in the newspapers of people talking about the warrants around the time
Yes.
of.
Yeah.
a changeover from monarchs.
Yes, yeah, that would be really interesting actually, because it is, you can find the Royal Warrant Holders Association. They have a website and it lists all of the royal warrants for various things, and it's very varied. I mean, you've got it's anything from kind of mattresses to jam to everything in between, but it includes all of the clothing suppliers as well.
Amazing. I wondered whether you would be up for me sharing a couple of bits that I found in the Royal Household records. So when the 1921 census came out last year, I was looking at the royal household at the time. So that was at Windsor Castle on census night, and you've got the royal family living there. You've got the King of Spain, I think, who is visiting. You've got all of these other visitors. You've got the visited servants, and then you go into the royal household. And there are pages and pages and pages. If anybody's looked at it, it's quite astounding. There are so many people living and working on site. And I was trying to tease out some stories, and I went back to it the other day, and I thought I'd like to just share with you a couple of interesting figures that I found. So this guy, Frederick Weller, he was a luggage packer, or the luggage packer, in fact, in the royal household. And his royal household record is on the left-hand side here. And when I mentioned earlier about these Lord Chamberlain's department records being filled out by the person themselves, this is a really, really good example of a much more detailed one that I've found. So he gives his full name, he gives his date of birth. So handy, as we know, as historians, as family historians, when you find a date of birth on a record without ordering a certificate, that's always a win. And it says, I came into the Royal Service July 26, 1902, as captain of His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. I think that says something launch. I can't quite read. Elective launch, possibly. I can't read it. The launch was only used 2 of the 3 months each year. The rest of my time I worked as a house carpenter at Marlborough House. The launch was sold in the latter part of 1906. If anybody can tell me what the launch is, I would be really grateful.
I mean, would it be something boaty?
Potentially, if he's a carpenter, because he did come in as a carpenter. So that's filled out in his handwriting. You've got his signature there. And then the other image here is another royal household record, and it tells me that he was the house carpenter at Buckingham Palace between 1902 and 1910, and he earned £100 a year for that. And then when you find him in the 1921 census, he's no longer a carpenter, he is a luggage packer.
That's amazing. I find that really, because you know the idea of a luggage packer is so brilliant. Louis Vuitton actually started, you know, everyone is probably aware of the brand, luxury luggage brand, but Louis Vuitton started as a luggage packer in Paris. And if you think about the quantity of stuff that the royals have to move if they are either traveling or even if they're just going from one residence to another, that logistically is enormous. They would have to have tokens, the dressers would have to plan in advance who was going where, who was traveling with the luggage, who was going to stay with the Queen. And so the luggage packer's job is really, it's important.
Because they moved round, right? This is a tradition that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. And I'm just thinking back to my time at university now, where I think it was to do with the fact that if the royal household and the court were at one place for too long, then there'd be a drain on the resources. So they'd have to move around every now and then to various royal residences. And that's something that sort of still happens today, but for different reasons.
Yes, exactly. And then all of the things like the state visits and traveling abroad now and everything that goes with that. So yeah, I find those the role of a luggage packer, that's fascinating.
Yeah, cool guy. This one was tugged at my heartstrings. So Richard Howlett was the valet to George V in the 1921 census, and he started out as a footman in 1893. He then got promoted to a brusher in 1895, and then a valet in 1898. And again, this is filled out by himself. This is his own handwriting on the left-hand side here. We've got his date of birth again. And what I found particularly heart-wrenching about this is that he entered the he was the Prince of Wales at the time. He entered his household in 1893, and he stayed with the Prince of Wales and later George V for many, many years, right up until his death. And when George V died, there were 2 processions for the funeral. And despite the fact that Richard was very, very ill himself and was struggling to move, he walked in both processions because it says, his friend, his valet, and I just thought that was
yeah. And that's really the thing with dressers for the Queen and then valets for the men, that although they have these ladies in waiting or the equivalent, the male equivalent, they worked on a rota system, so they would work 3 months on, 3 months off. So you wouldn't have the same people around you. The people that were most consistently around you were your dresser and your valet. They were the people that were with you every day, deciding what to wear, helping you with the bathing and things. So they did strike up perhaps closer friendships with them than the kind of more formal sort of ladies in waiting and those sorts of, which were more aristocratic posts. And so I think they are very probably the most honest relationships perhaps that the royal family had.
Yeah. But this really, when I found this, there were quite a few instances of this story in the newspapers, and they all pulled on this very emotional element of Richard and George V were friends, and I love that very much.
Oh, Richard.
I've got one more, and this is a dresser. So there were I think there were 3 or 4 dressers that were noted in the 1921 census. Interestingly, with the Windsor Castle return in the 1921 census, there are 2 different versions of it, which is quite bizarre. I'll have to send you the different versions. But on one version, you've got 4 dressers on the same page. But for one of them, the occupation is very obscure. It's very difficult to read. And actually, she was, what was her name? Charlotte Bill. She was actually the royal nursemaid.
Okay.
So she brought up all of George and Mary's children, I think. But then on the other version of the record, Charlotte is listed as a dresser. So I think there's a discrepancy there.
Okay,
But Ada was one of at least 3, and she entered royal service in 1909, I think.
Okay.
And she served Queen Mary for decades.
Wow.
And in fact, when actually one of the versions of the 1921 census is the image bottom left. When Ada married, she married quite late on in life. She got married in 1930, and this was widely reported because she was having to give up her post with Queen Mary, a post she'd held for many, many years. And I think she was actually the head dresser, the chief dresser by the time she got married. And then it was, who's going to be Queen Mary's dresser now? It was big news, apparently.
Yes, because they are the principal dresser. You would have the principal dresser, and then you'd have a couple of second dressers, and then you would have wardrobe maids, and they all occupied the office of robes and sat in the wardrobe and would have different kind of tasks to do depending on what their kind of hierarchy in the dressers kind of space was.
If you go back to something like 1921 and you're looking at that household, you do get people like the mistress of the robes, but
that's a more ceremonial post. So the mistress of the robes was an aristocrat who headed up this kind of the machinery of the office of robes, and she did deal with things like who was being employed. She would send out letters of if somebody was retiring and what their pension would be. So there was a sort of administrative aspect to it, but the mistress of the robes wasn't really dealing with the clothes. She was just kind of overseeing the people that worked in it, and then the dressers were the ones that were saying, right, this needs to go back, and because it's got to be cleaned, there are buttons that are needed on this, we need someone to go and fetch this pair of shoes, or they're the ones that are doing this huge logistical operation to make sure that the Queen just kind of sails off into the sunset looking amazing.
Yes, they're the
workhorses,
practical element, so to speak. But what I found fascinating, there was another dresser, which one was it? Was it Emily Weller? And she's also there in 1921. She got married, I think she was 64, early 70s, and then she got married as well, and then had to retire. And she married a chap he was 74, and he had also been in royal service, and that was also a big thing. That was also quite widely reported.
Yeah. There's a good book for anyone that is interested specifically in Victorian household. It's called Serving Victoria, and it's a book that's all about people that worked particularly in the royal household for Queen Victoria in all sorts of different roles.
Just so many people. Like I could have just carried on looking. Like I could have looked at the page and stuff. In fact, I might go back and have a look at the pages as well. But I was short on time, so I just did these few.
They're brilliant.
But yes, I found it fascinating. Ellen says, was that an electric launch? I thought it said electric too. And actually, now that I think of it, maybe they were electrifying. That's not the correct term.
Yes, it could be. Yeah, so kind of installing all of the new technology.
Yes, which would make sense for a carpenter.
It would, and time period. Yes, it would.
So there we go. Thank you, Ellen. Glad you had your head switched on today, unlike me. Lovely. Yes. Oh, Victoria says, I wish my grandmother had kept a note diary of the wedding dresses and gowns she made. An apprentice to a gown maker in the 1930s, aged 14 in London, she apparently made some exquisite things. She was so modest and thought she was stupid, really, as had to leave school so young. She was far from stupid, though, and whizzed things up on her machine so quickly. Would love to discover where she had worked one day.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. And that's the thing, dressmakers and gown makers in the 19th and early 20th century, they formed the backbone of so much of, because you couldn't get, lots of stuff still wasn't ready to wear until later in the 19th century. And so they are so important to the way that people acquired their clothes, and such an important service. So what a great thing she must have made.
If you ever work it out, Victoria, you have to tell me and Kate, okay? We want to know first.
We want to know.
Also, I have to highlight this. Rutland Strings over on YouTube says, my father-in-law's mum made clothes for Queen Elizabeth II.
Who was she, Rutland?
We'll have to put you guys in touch. We'll have to put you two in touch, because
these are the stories I want.
If anybody knows of anybody who made clothes or garments for the royals, Kate wants to speak to you.
I want to know. And there's so many. I mean, a few years ago, I went to see a lace maker, because I live in Devon, a Honiton lace maker who had made lace for Princess Diana and for early bits of Honiton lace for when William and Harry were little. And again, she was told she had to destroy all the patterns because they didn't want them to be copied. And she didn't. She said, look, I've got them here. And she got them all out and showed me.
Yes, that's exactly what we want to see.
Yeah.
Don't destroy them. Right. If anybody has any questions for Kate, we are coming up to time. Please add them into the comments, and we'll try to get to them before we finish up. Kate, is there anything that we haven't discussed that you would particularly like to chat about at all before we finish?
Well, no, as I say, only if I'm really interested in hearing from anybody who, so my research is covering from the beginning of Queen Victoria's reign through to recent. I mean, I'm going to look at the now Princess of Wales and how she sort of strategizes her wardrobe. So anyone that knows anyone from either the past or more recent sort of interactions with with the makers specifically, suppliers or makers, I would love to hear from anyone, and you can get hold of me really easily. So, for example, my university work email, you only have to Google my name, and you can contact me really easily.
Excellent. Victoria does have a question. Please advise where to look for apprenticeships and gown makers to aid my research into my grandmother.
So one of the there's the this book is brilliant. Here, I just happen to have it because I am using it. It's called Shops and Shopping, and it's by a lady called Alison Adbergam. And that has got a whole, I mean, it's chock full of different different establishments, the history of various shops. There are another thing that you can do, there are various directories online. So trade directories, Kelly's, for example, or like the London Post Office directory. They're available online, and you can look in those. They have, it's an alphabetized list of people and their occupations. So it doesn't give you very much information, but it will tell you the address, and it can be a good springboard, those kind of trade directories.
Oh, look what Karen's added. There we go. London Roll Apprentice Records.
That's amazing.
And also our friend Rutland Strings over on YouTube. It's got the name for you. Lillian Maud Perkins, married name Hubbard. Her census listing was Court Dressmaker's Hand.
Oh, amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You'll watch. She'll appear in Kate's next book now.
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining today for this little chat about coronations and clothes. And I absolutely love it when Kate comes on Findmypast From Home, because we can just talk about
it's such a lot of fun. I really enjoy it.
And Kate, thank you so much, because I know you're in the midst of book publicity right now. So I appreciate you very much making the time for this today. As you can see, you are a very popular guest, and everybody loves it when you come on. So thank you so
brilliant.
much.
Well, I'm really thrilled to be here. So thanks for having me again.
If you are watching live, please join us for Friday's Live tomorrow at 4 o'clock UK time. Rose is going to be presenting, and I believe it's going to be a coronation special. I've been sending Rose newspaper images all day of things that I think that I've come across. I'm like, you should show this off in Friday's Live this week. So yes, please join us for that. Thank you, Rose, for doing comments today. Please say bye to Rose as well. And we will catch you next time. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.